Leading off our discussion tonight is Congressman Adam Smith of Washington. He is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Thank you very much for joining us. So the House committee has exactly the same jurisdiction as the Senate Armed Services Committee, except they do the confirmation process. But whoever is the next defense secretary is going to have to come to your committee, is going to need credibility with your committee, presumably in many different situations. Can you imagine a Secretary Hegseth, on the state of the evidence we know now, actually testifying to your committee about any matters?
Well, not with any credibility.
Yeah.
I think that's a key point. Now, there's also the matter of, does he have experience at the Pentagon or even running an organization similarly? Can he handle that level of bureaucracy, just the day in and day out of running it? But his credibility right now is nowhere. I mean, you've mentioned some of the drinking, the sexual assault allegations, but he was actually, you know, in a prominent position in two separate veterans organizations that he ran both of them into the ground, and that's where a ton of the allegations come from people who worked with him. I forget the name of the second organization, the one funded by the Koch brothers that he ran. That's where all the allegations of drinking, spending the money on parties, womanizing, and just running the organization in the most horrible manner possible. And he's not going to have the credibility because, as you've mentioned, we deal with some pretty serious issues. And he does not seem to be up to that job.
In the reporting, it was a woman working at one of those veterans organizations, small group of maybe 10 employees, who had to pull him away from getting on the stage in a strip club. She managed to save him from being the nominee who actually was on the stage at a strip club to now just the one who was pulled off by one of his coworkers. That same woman says on the same night, another one of the coworkers, the men in the organization, then tried to rape her. That's the organization he was running. That would be days of Senate confirmation questions in any previous situation.
Yeah, well, and that's really the I guess, interesting, troubling, traumatic aspect of this is, look, Donald Trump has built his career on, I can say whatever I want, and you're not really hearing it. And we'll do whatever we want, and we'll decide what the truth is after the fact. And I think he's going to test that theory. I don't share the confidence of a lot of people that Pete Hegseth is necessarily not going to get the votes, because they are going to put the pressure on Joni Ernst, on Deb Fischer, and everybody once say, this isn't about anything. That's all just made up stuff. Don't believe any of that. Are you with me or aren't you? Donald Trump's going to push that. I guess the thought I had is, if he can make RFK Jr. eat a Big Mac, can he make, you know, Senate Republicans vote for an obviously unqualified candidate who lacks the credibility to do the job? I don't know that I would bet the mortgage against that.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things about the timing. It's the confirmation hearing is not until some point in January. We're not sure when. His probably will be one of the later ones, but it gives them more time in Iowa to build primary challenges against Joni Ernst and to make her take that into consideration.
I mean, that's been the fundamental feature of Donald Trump's rise in the Republican Party. It goes all the way back to Mark Sanford. Mark Sanford said a few critical things about Donald Trump back in 2017. It wasn't even nothing compared to what's now. They primaried him and they beat him. And that message was received by Republicans.
As we go forward with this, in addition to, there's going to be so much attention on the sexual allegations, the rape allegations involving Pete Hegseth, the drunkenness both at work and publicly in strip clubs and all of that stuff, the mismanagement. What about the actual job of Secretary of Defense? What are the kinds of questions that a nominee of his minimal experience should face about the actual job?
Well, there's two big aspects of that. One is you're running a $900 billion organization with several million employees, the world's largest bureaucracy. What do you know about doing that? How are you going to deal with that bureaucracy? You make a decision. How are you going to make sure it goes forward? What are your ideas for reforming the Department of Defense? You know, Mike Rogers, who's the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and I are very focused on getting the Pentagon to innovate more quickly, to become a more efficient, more rapidly moving organization. What does he know about that? But also, what are his policies? You know, he's written a couple of books, and his basic policy seems to be only men need to be involved in the military, all right? So we're going to get rid of women. We're going to get rid of anyone in the LGBTQ community. How's that going to work in terms of recruitment? Women serve in the military very effectively. And if you read what he has to say about it, he seems to think that all we need in the military, his word, are dudes. So how are you going to work with people who aren't, your mirror image straight white guy? Because you do have to figure out how to work with people who are different from you to run an organization of that size. My gosh, once we get past the drunkenness and the sexual assault allegations, there are pretty serious policy questions that also need to be asked.
We're going to try to squeeze in a quick commercial. We will squeeze in a quick commercial break right here so we can continue this conversation. I want to cover more about Syria when we come back. We'll be right back with Congressman Adam Smith after this break. Back with us, Congressman Adam Smith, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. So Secretary Blinken laid out some rather significant stakes in this situation.
Yes, no, absolutely. And look, I think what President-elect Trump is probably focusing on is we shouldn't be militarily involved. And to some extent, he's right. Now, I will point out, we have some troops in eastern Syria because of ISIS. And there are tens of thousands of ISIS prisoners in camps there that we want to make sure don't escape. So there is that tiny little military piece. But fundamentally, it is correct to say the U.S. military shouldn't be showing up trying to fix this problem. But we absolutely have an interest in being involved in Syria. It is an incredible opportunity. For too long, governments in the Middle East have been led by religious extremism or hatred of one group or another. There is an opportunity for Syria to actually focus on governing its citizens well, and we ought to help them in that. We ought to find ways to work with them, whether it's humanitarian assistance, whether it's working with people in the region, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, convincing them to help. If we build a solid government in Syria, that could be a major blow to Iran's efforts to continually destabilize the region. So we should not simply ignore what's going on in Syria.
It sounds like what you're hoping for does require very solid intelligence about exactly what's going on, possibly a physical presence there at some level to be able to report back. Here are the different factions. Here are the ones who are sympathetic to the way we think.
Certainly at a diplomatic level. I mean, and we've seen this play out in a whole bunch of different places, frequently not well, by the way.
Right.
When a government falls.
There's that exhilarating moment of seeing the horrible dictator knocked out, and then what happens?
Well, who's going to take over, and who are these people? Now, this seems like a better organized rebel movement that made an effort to be inclusive. Now, where the leadership came from initially was an offshoot of ISIS, and that is worth worrying about. But he seems to have changed and brought in other people, but we don't know. So we need diplomats, we need intel, we need to know what's going on to try to help Syria get to a path that doesn't have it supporting ISIS, and hopefully, like I said, has it governing Syria well, and that could bleed over into Lebanon, which, as you know, has been a disaster for some time, and we could really have a more peaceful, stable region if the Syrian rebels get this right.
This sounds like, historically, the stuff of a special envoy. This seems like a situation where a president would, in addition to the ambassadorial corps that's already present in the Middle East, say, I'm choosing some highly experienced person to try to get in there to get real contact with the new elements who have emerged in Syria.
Right, and absolutely. And the roles that the countries around Syria are going to play, Turkey, which I haven't mentioned yet, it's going to be crucial. Turkey has interests in Syria because they are concerned about the Kurds, the PKK, and how we work with Turkey to make sure that they don't disrupt what's going on there, make them a positive player instead of a negative player. It's a real complicated diplomatic picture, and yes, the experience of the U.S. and our intel background could be enormously helpful.
It would be good to have highly experienced members of the cabinet, for example, at a time like that.
It would. Right, and not just people who promise not to drink anymore.
Yeah, promising not to drink. Representative Adam Smith, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Donald Trump said yesterday he wants all of the members of the January 6th committee to go to jail. There